welcome to our first episode of ET at the Movies, where we get you ready for what's hitting theaters this weekend. I'm Ash Crossan.
I am John Boone, and as you can see today, we are talking about the most wonderful woman in the superhero galaxy, Mantis. We're talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2.
Volume 2. We've got our rockets.
Our rockets.
Almost matching rockets. We've got a Groot.
Baby Groot. Kind of Baby Groot.
Kind of Baby Groot. And then you've got your jacket on.
I've got a little Star-Lord for you today. I don't think I'm wearing it as well as Chris Pratt, but I'm trying.
Let me just say, I loved Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 so much. It has such a special place in my heart because as a media person, it was the first movie that I worked on from when it was announced to when it actually premiered. And of course, walking out of the theater, I already couldn't wait for Volume 2, and it's finally here.
And I loved Volume 1. It's certainly in my top one, maybe, 1, 2 Marvel movies.
It's my number one.
But almost exactly a year ago to this date, I was on the set of Volume 2, and that was really cool.
So you have a lot of insight.
I've got some insight. I've got as much insight as Marvel will let you have.
Well, let's run down everything that we need to know, where we kick off.
Yes.
The plot of the actual movie, I'm going to read you the one-liner, is that the Guardians must fight to keep their newfound family together as they unravel the mystery of Peter Quill's true parentage. Lots of layers here.
That's the one plot line you can't talk about. It's all spoilers if you start digging into that.
Well, let's say I'm just a casual fan, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe is such an overwhelming world. There's so many movies.
You don't say.
Yeah, and I know at this point they kind of say we're not really trying to bring in the casual fan anymore. But let's say I am. What do I actually need to know before going into this movie?
The nice thing about this one is it has been a few years since Volume 1. It has been a few years since our band of intergalactic misfits guarded that galaxy for the first time. But only a few months have passed in the Guardians verse, so you don't need to know about Ultron. You don't need to know about Ant-Man. You don't need to know anything else. This is probably the most self-contained Marvel movie that's happened in a while. You don't even need to know about Thanos, and he was a big person in the first. They talk about him, but you don't see him.
Right.
They talk about the Infinity Stones, those all-encompassing Infinity Stones. You don't see them.
I would almost say for this one, you really just need to see the first one.
Yeah,
and then if you
first.
have more knowledge than that, then you just kind of get some fun surprises along the way.
Yeah.
So we can get into what we personally thought the biggest differences between the first and second movie are later.
And we will.
And we will. But we did talk to James Gunn about this, and in his own words, what he thinks the biggest difference is.
I think the biggest difference is that in the first movie, it really was the story of Peter Quill, and surrounded by these supporting players. The second one is a story about all of the Guardians. They each get their own story. We learn a lot more about Gamora and Groot and Nebula and Rocket. They each have their own stories. Not to mention, Yondu and Drax and Mantis, the new characters. So there's a lot of them.
And that's very true. And we can get into those specifics of those characters later because there's a lot to get into. But who is the returning cast?
It's really who you would expect it to be. It's your Guardians, it's your Star-Lord, it's your Gamora, it's your Drax, it's your Groot, it's your kind of Groot, it's your Rocket. And then it's Yondu, who was a very big part in the first movie. You're not going to forget him. It's Nebula, another big part from the first movie. You're not going to forget her. One thing from set that I thought was interesting was James Gunn said Glenn Close, who plays Nova Prime in the first movie, was going to be in this one, and she's not.
I know that.
Yes, they cut out all the little people from the first movie. It's just the main ones that you would remember anyway.
But we do have some new players.
Yes.
New players!
Exciting new players, Joe.
Can we consider Little Groot a new player?
Can you consider someone who stole the entire first movie in their 1-second little pot dance a new player? He has a lot of new personalities.
It's a totally different, it's a totally different character, basically. And then who else we have? We have Mantis.
Mantis is so cool and so weird, and I think James Gunn loves her. I wouldn't be surprised if he upped her a little bit when they started shooting. And then, yeah, she's so good with Drax. Her stuff with Drax is some of the funniest stuff in the movie.
I even remember back at Comic-Con, James Gunn kept mentioning her to the point where I was like, she's going to have a bigger part than we think she does.
On set, I just remember this. He said, he was like, she did something with this character during the audition process that was the most amazing thing he'd seen in either of the Guardians movies. So her audition was essentially better than Chris Pratt, better than Zoe Saldana. Better than Bradley Cooper. Did he audition? I don't know what that audition looked like.
And then, of course, Kurt Russell joining the cast as Ego.
Now, I don't think we should say that much. This is one case where I actually do think Marvel's clamp down secrecy on it is worth it. I think the least you can know going into this movie about Ego in actual living planet, the better.
But what I love about his addition to the cast is that Chris Pratt was such a big fan of his, and they connected so much on set.
You learn to sort of like be cool, you know? And I think ultimately the best part is moving past that stuff, which to both him and I is we both understand it's pretty meaningless, and so I think we move right past that almost immediately and go into the things like our personal connection that we have with, you know, similar passions that we share. Like we really do seem like we're from of the same ilk. You know, we're both outdoorsmen. We, you know, like to fish and hunt and get outside, and there's a lot of similarities there and things we can relate to if we were just two guys who met on the subway. You know,
I mean, we can talk about in a spoiler-free kind of zone of what worked and what didn't for you.
I mean, has Kurt Russell ever been a not great addition to a cast?
But you know, one thing, if I did have to nitpick, and I don't want to because I think everything was just turned up a lot. It was volume 2. It literally was like volume 1, volume 2. Right. I did think there was like maybe a little too much humor at some point.
Oh, this movie has never met a gag it didn't like, never met a one-liner it didn't like. Their philosophy is more. And for the most part, I'm like, yeah, I'll take it. I don't have a problem with you spending like 8 minutes on a Baby Groot gag.
You know, the first one, I think I was a little timid. It was my first really big movie that I was directing, and I was like, I don't know, I don't want it to be too much of a comedy. And the second one, I'm like, I'm just going to go all James Gunn, go all out, let it be as funny as possible, and also let it be as emotional as possible, and really to show all the different sides of these characters. I felt very free on this one.
I do love that. I love that he was just kind of free to do his own thing. I think Marvel really trusted him to just go with it, and it shows.
To a degree, like, the stuff that it does kind of redo from the first movie, it, like, you're seeing it with fresh eyes. We're not getting into too many spoilers, but there's a Baby Groot dance sequence at the beginning that is a breath of fresh air.
Right, and the one thing I will say about Volume 2 too is like, it's gonna live in the shadow of the first one.
Right.
That was like, I've heard people say this, the lightning in the bottle scenario that you're never gonna recreate. So you have to go into this one knowing that it's gonna be something different, but they did do the callbacks that I think we kind of craved.
And everybody that I've heard of talk about it is like, it's a great movie, it's so much fun. Is it as wonderful and magnificent and weird and strange as the first one? It certainly tries to be.
I think it is. I think most of us went into Volume 1 like, of course there was people that knew the comics. I didn't. I went into that movie completely not knowing what to expect and walking out of the theater just being like, what was that? That was the best thing I've ever seen. So now you're going into this one with an expectation.
Right. And whether it lives up or not, I think is going to be up to you. But
up to you.
I loved it. I loved it. And
I loved it.
Speaking of love, I love that this movie, for as cool as it is and how savvy and swaggy it thinks all its characters are, it's like openly schmaltzy. It wears its heart fully on its sleeve, and it's like, it's cool to love.
Absolutely. Well, what did you think of the soundtrack?
There's so many great music cues in this one, like the Fleetwood Mac use of the chain, so good. There's a song choice towards the end of the movie that made me tear up.
Well, you do have a little bit of insight because Zoe was telling us that she was listening to music on set.
The day I was on set was the day they were playing Fleetwood Mac The Chain, and they blast it through the speakers as the characters are acting. And the actors all said they did love it, and Zoe loved it, but I remember her walking off set being like, it's Groundhog Day. I love this song, but it is always playing.
As artists, music plays such an important role in you putting something together. Sometimes a song can just take you somewhere really quickly, and then you're feeling all those sensations that you were experiencing at that time. So I think that music for James Gunn does that for him. He writes these scenes or the story with the music always playing in the background, and for him to play it for us, it eases us into whatever emotional beat we're channeling, and it's super fun.
Okay, so before we say anything else, why don't we end it here? Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 comes out May 5th, and we are going to do a spoiler video tomorrow.
Spoiler warning.
A spoiler warning tomorrow on ET's YouTube page, so check that out.
Come back.
Subscribe, like, comment so we can keep doing videos like this. Come back after you've seen it.
Bye.